Time to want to get right back to a big story that we have been following here over the last day as we saw this post from President Donald Trump on Truth Social. He said, quote, based on the highly provocative statements of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. Words are very important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances. Thank you for your attention to this matter. A lot to discuss about all of that here, so I do want to bring in a guest. We do have Cliff May, the founder and president of the Foundation for Defense and Democracies and a good friend of the show. Cliff, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Good to be with you, Josh.
All right, so I do have to ask here, because we know this is far from the first time that someone there in Russia, especially high-ranking, has made a comment about the U.S., criticizing it or criticizing President Trump. So what does it appear it is about that highly provocative comment that really struck Trump and led to what we're seeing now?
So Dmitry Medvedev, who is, let me be blunt about this, he is both Putin's lapdog and attack dog. That's sort of his role here. And he is trying to intimidate President Trump. He is trying to intimidate the U.S. and make us cow. He recalls very well, frankly, that every time he threatened Biden, Biden said, we can't provoke President Putin. We want to de-escalate. And Biden did things like say, well, we can give some defensive weapons to Ukraine, but nothing offensive. We don't want to, we give them missiles, but they can't use those missiles to hit military targets inside Russia. And so what you were doing, I'm afraid, under Biden was you were preventing Ukraine from losing quickly, but allowing them to lose slowly. President Trump has been trying very hard not to humiliate President Putin. President Putin needn't lose face. I think he made it kind of clear implicitly that if President Putin would simply agree to a ceasefire, he would be able to keep, say, Crimea, which he conquered and annexed in 2014. He'd be able to keep the lands that he has conquered so far, roughly 20% of the eastern portion of Ukraine and a land bridge to that Crimean peninsula, and that he should just stop there. And Putin, in conversation after conversation, as you know, with Trump, was, as Trump said, tagging me along. In other words, stringing me along, saying, yeah, I want peace too, but I need to, but let's talk, we'll get to that. And I think it helped a lot that Melania, the First Lady, eventually told Trump what was going on, because Trump said to Melania, he's talked about this a couple of times, he would tell Melania, I just had a wonderful conversation with Vladimir. And she'd say, yeah. And after you did that, he bombed hospitals, and he bombed kindergartens, he bombed residential apartment buildings. She understood what was going on. So I think what President Trump is doing now with the submarines is simply making very clear, you're not intimidating me. You don't want to threaten me. You don't want to threaten the United States. You don't want a war with us. Do you understand what that would mean for you? You would lose very, very badly. Stop bluffing like this. I don't like it.
And I am showing you the post from Dmitry right here. Again, the former president of Russia, the one that sparked all of this. He wrote, Trump's playing the ultimatum game with Russia. 50 days or 10, he should remember 2 things. 1, Russia isn't Israel or even Iran. 2, each new ultimatum is a threat and a step toward war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. Don't go down the Sleepy Joe road. So Dmitry's comments here, are they viewed highly? You mentioned that he's essentially Putin's lapdog. So are they taken seriously when you look in different political circles, or is this just what he does?
Well, it's what he does, but he does so at Putin's behest. Putin wants him to be doing this. What you're seeing here is nuclear blackmail. And he hopes that the president says, I'm very frightened of this. We don't have a golden dome. You keep in mind, during the Soviet era, we had a strategy called mad, mutually assured destruction. It said, you do not want to hit us with a nuclear weapon, either because we would then hit you with nuclear weapons and we'd all go down. And, in the Soviet period, I have to say the Soviets were evil, but they were rational. They had suffered greatly in World War II. They didn't want a nuclear exchange. I don't believe Putin does either. He wants to restore the Russian Empire. That's his mission. And that's why he wants to drag Ukraine back into the Russian Empire, which for a while was the Soviet Empire. But he can threaten this, and if he wins, it's a huge win if America backs down and says we can't interfere with anything that Russia wants to do. But keep in mind, if we succumb to nuclear blackmail from Russia, then we surely will succumb to nuclear blackmail from communist China, and why not from Kim Jong-un? He has nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles as well. Tehran would have done the same thing, but President Trump, wisely, I would say, bombed Fordow and a couple of other nuclear weapons facilities, which at least sets back the Islamic Republic's drive to have nuclear weapons and the missiles to deliver them anywhere on Earth.
Is this likely to end up, and we don't obviously know at this point, but is it likely to end up as kind of a tit for tat type thing where Russia decides that they want to do something now in response to those nuclear subs being moved around?
I doubt that very much. I think there's a reason why Putin is using Medvedev for this and keeping this at arm's length. I don't think Putin wants to see the destruction of Russia. I don't think he wants a war with the U.S. What he wants is to restore the Russian Empire. Ukraine, very important part of that. Belarus, the name of that country means White Russia, was part of the Russian Empire, was part of the Soviet Union, of course. It's essentially a vassal state at this point. He is working very hard and successfully, I would say, Putin, to drag Georgia, an independent nation, back into Russia's embrace. He took in 2008 2 provinces away from Georgia, and he's manipulating the current government of Georgia. He's interfering in Moldova, also an independent state that was part of the Soviet Union, part of the Russian Empire. He is threatening the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Those were republics of the Soviet Union that the United States, by the way, never recognized as republics of the Soviet Union, always recognized their independence. The Poles feel very threatened, almost everybody. The Finns, that's why the Finns have now joined NATO. That's why the Swedes have now joined NATO, because they all feel threatened by Putin. What the next step is this. President Trump has said, look, I'm not giving you 50 days. I'm giving you 10 days, and then I'm going to put very, very tough sanctions on you. Secondary sanctions, we can discuss what that means, but it's a way to squeeze the Russian economy and make it hard for Putin to fund his war effort. He's also sending more munitions to Ukraine, both things like Patriot missiles, which help prevent Russian missiles and drones from destroying civilian targets, and this is a terrorist war. Putin is hitting civilian targets every day. And I think he will send, long-range missiles without the restrictions, and that will also cause pain to Putin. And maybe at a certain point, Putin says, okay, this is not great. I'll agree, not to peace, but to a ceasefire. Maybe to wait till the next president comes in, and maybe things will be easier for him, maybe to do something else. But what Trump needs to do, and I think is wanting to do, is change Putin's cost-benefit calculus for continuing this war, as opposed to cessation of hostilities. I think that's the most one can achieve, but if President Trump achieves that, give him a lot of credit.
And my final question for you here, how have we kind of seen a shift over the past several weeks and months? Because if you look months back, we saw President Trump and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky kind of arguing there, things getting heated inside of the Oval Office. Now, of course, we see President Trump and Russia's President Putin not necessarily getting along. They're kind of butting heads there. So how have we seen the views that President Trump has on the war itself kind of change over the past several weeks and months?
Yeah, very much so. There was, first of all, Putin seemed to be to Trump somebody he could get along with, a serious guy, a reasonable guy. But now I think he understands that's not the case. This is a former KGB lieutenant colonel, and what he says and what he believes and what he means are very different. He's gotten frustrated and fed up with Putin to a great extent. I think that's true. And I think, again, I think Melania Trump made clear to him, this guy is not your friend. This guy is not somebody easy to do business with. He's a thug. She knows she was born in a communist country, keep in mind. As for Zelensky, they didn't get along for a while for various reasons. They're getting along better. Why? Because Zelensky said, tell me what you want. You want a deal on minerals? I'll give you a deal on minerals, absolutely. But you got to have an independent Ukraine to go to complete that deal. You want a 30-day ceasefire? You got a 30-day ceasefire. Zelensky is saying yes, yes, yes to Trump. Putin is saying no, no, no. That changes Trump's attitude towards both of them. I think Trump is seeing the situation more clearly now than he did with help from Melania and because of the intransigence and truculence of Putin, and Zelensky being very willing to say, we want to be your friend, your ally. We want to be we want to be a partner, not a dependent. We're not asking for boots on the ground. We are asking for the weapons we can use to fight America's #2 adversary, who keeps threatening you, by the way. Wouldn't it be, we want to be helpful to you, and we want to be led by you as part of the free world. That's a pretty good argument, it seems to me.
All right, Cliff May, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and help break it down. As always, we appreciate your time.
Thanks, Josh. Always good to see you.
Good to see you. 10:55 on the East Coast, 7:55 on the West Coast. We do have to head to a quick 2-minute commercial break, but so much more live news coming up here on this Saturday, August 2nd.